According to Lilienfeld in school psychology, cognitive mistakes are especially problematic when they contribute to the adoption of pseudoscientific practices, those that seem to be grounded in science but are not. Such techniques may be ineffective or even harmful to school children and more broadly can lead to suboptimal assessment, intervention, or both.
Many are aware of the perceived gap between science and practice. Simply put, the gap is concerned with the connection of scientific findings and application to practice. So, psychological practices and what practitioners actually do isn't aligned with scientific evidence. This is actually the first I've heard of the scientist practitioners gap. Since I've been in the school psychology program, I've been constantly drilled to use database decisions when selecting and implementing interventions or pretty much making any decisions. The use of research and evidence is deeply embedded in decision making in the field of school psychology. Lilienfeld, Ammariti, and David cited a quote from Reynolds that states, "It is not enough to read the literature or to attend in service or continuing education seminars. We must read and listen carefully. Just because a paper is published in a peer-reviewed journal does not mean the science is accurate or necessarily strong." So, just because an article is published in a peer-reviewed journal does not make the research valid or reliable, nor does it mean it has evidentiary groundings. As consumers of knowledge, we should approach all research with a bit of skepticism and question the methodology and evidence, or the field will remain characterized by popular yet poorly supported techniques. While reading this section about non evidence based practices, I immediately thought of the ongoing debate on vaccines and autism. There is no scientific proof that vaccines or vaccinations cause or increase prevalence of autism, yet parents are refusing to vaccinate children due to this unsupported claim. Another popular tool that is used with no reliability or validity among school psychologists is the IQ achievement discrepancy model. There is little to no scientific basis or base for using this approach. Evidence is non existent. Um, Actually, there is more evidence to show that the IQ achievement model do not accurately identify specific learning disabilities. But yet, with the obvious issues of the discrepancy model, school psychologists continuously use this discrepancy model to identify children with specific learning disabilities. Survey evidence for the scientist practitioner gap in school psychologists discuss the overusage and misuse of projective tests. Not only are respondents using projectile techniques, they are using them for purposes for which they have not been validated specifically. In Psych 752, I was introduced to projective testing. According to Dr. Jones, projective tests were never intended to be used as a basis for diagnosing. Instead, these tests are used to gather information and create a discussion about the client's thoughts and emotions. The idea is when the children are given ambiguous stimuli, they will project their own personal thoughts and feelings into the scenarios. Projective tests do not have a standard grading scale as cognitive tests, making these tests highly subjective and biased. Interpretation of scores are derived from inferences drawn from the examiner. Interpretations varies from one examiner to the next, and considering examiners are exposed to different experiences, the chances of having the same conclusion to the examinee's response is close to impossible. Projective tests are given too much credit. They should not be used as a purpose for diagnosing psychopathology. It should only be used as a means for gathering insight of children's thoughts and affect. Pseudoscience in school psychology is the notion that practitioners in school psychology tend to base their practices on science that's not really science. Um, it's it's not science because of the lack of evidence and empirical support. Psychology is indeed an actual science, but what differentiates psychology from other fields such as biology and chemistry and physics, is the methodology, the way psychologists gather research data, generalize and draw inference on that data, and apply that data to the real world. There are several myths and misconceptions relevant to school psychology. Keep in mind these are poorly supported. It's believed that self-esteem causes poor school performance and poor interpersonal skills. Evidence does not support this claim, but it does acknowledge that there is a relationship, but it's not causation. Late talking in children, late speech development is a symptom of autism, but it's not a marked indicator. So just because a child have late speech development does not mean that they will have autism. Discovery learning. Children who learn concepts on their own without assistance or direct instructions have a deeper and more enduring knowledge. It's actually not true according to research that those children actually are less effective. And dyslexia. Generally, dyslexia is defined as letter reversal in reading. However, according to Dr. Jones, with dyslexia is more of a lack of phonemic awareness.
Science is not a body of accumulated facts and figures, nor is it a uniform truth device that is identical across diverse disciplines. The scientific method is introduced in high school science classes such as biology, physics, or chemistry. Science is a way of thinking, a mindset of doubt coupled with open-mindedness to new claims. Each scientific discipline is associated with its own set of safeguards against error. The focus of psychology is its methodology, or the way psychologists gather research data with a commitment to rooting out errors in our beliefs. In psychology, it is important to remember not to fall into naive realism or the old saying, I saw it with my own eyes. According to Lilienfeld, science is unnatural because it often requires us to override our gut hunches and intuitions about the natural world. The scientific method must be learned, practiced, and maintained as a habit of mind. When using an A-B design, a school psychologist may assume it was them providing an intervention that was responsible for the child's change in behavior because they witnessed it or saw it with their own eyes. If a child is struggling to stay seated in class, a psychologist may suggest a teacher provide stickers as a reward for staying seated. On removal of the intervention, in this case, the stickers, the original behavior will most likely increase, in which case the intervention will need to be provided again. One would like to think the intervening variables are responsible for the change in child behavior, but this conclusion neglects to consider a plethora of rival explanations for the improvement, which include, but are not limited to, the placebo effect, novelty effects, multiple treatment effects, and the regression to the mean. To truly evaluate whether the intervention worked, school psychologists must refer back to the scientific method. Only scientific methods can ultimately tell us if our intuitions are correct or incorrect.
Like visual illusions, cognitive errors can happen, and they happen in the same aspect in the sense that personally, they don't seem like they're errors at all. Just like visual illusions, we see it, we believe it's so true, we believe it's completely accurate, when in fact it's an error. So cognitive errors can happen in the same exact way to the same exact extent. So it's important that we become aware of what the cognitive errors are. We need to make sure that we are developing thinking skills and new habits so that we can overcome them. Researchers, professionals, no matter how intelligent you are, you're not immune to having lapses in judgment or maybe being biased at certain times, and that's okay, because scientific thinking, it doesn't always come naturally for everyone. And this is why we need science. This is why we have science. Science is a toolbox of techniques designed to minimize human error, which we're all capable of. So we're going to take a look at those, and the first one is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the hugest one because it's the most prominent one. It is the one that happens the most, that we're the most unaware of. It can become like tunnel vision. if professionals are unaware of their preconceptions that they have. So you want to make sure that you know yourself. When it comes to confirmation bias and allied errors, scientific practice calls for safeguards to be practiced. So this is why, there's so many rules, there's so many books, there's so much research you have to do, because you want to make sure that you're practicing these safeguards. What can happen is we can sometimes have two ideas and think, okay, there's an association between these two variables and it has to exist. Just because there's some kind of association does not imply a causal association between them. And this is where confirmation bias can kind of come in. So we want to make sure we're looking out for that. We also want to make sure we're looking out for illusory correlations. Sometimes we can kind of corroborate circumstances when it comes to our own expectations in certain situations. So, for example, we've all heard about psychologists. You get a drawing in front of your client or student or whoever you're seeing, and you tell them, hey, draw a stick-figured family. Draw your family. And if the child draws himself maybe on the opposite side of the paper, we would be, more likely to say, okay, maybe he's distant. He doesn't have a good relationship with his mom and dad. Maybe he's sad. Maybe he lacks healthy interpersonal relationships. And this is pretty much jumping to conclusions, and you're thinking that something's correlated when in fact maybe it's no correlation. And in fact, controlled research has found that these associations can be very uncorrelated and often are uncorrelated. So we want to make sure we're really considering that aspect as well, because that can be an error in judgment. Group thinking. Group thinking, you do it in every single class when we're all talking. You sit in a group, and it can be very beneficial. It can be very healthy. It can be very informative. What it does is it brings a sense of unity. It brings various perspectives. It brings new information, new thoughts. It can inspire new research. However, it can be very problematic as well. If an individual feels like they need to maybe conform to another person's, because another person could be biased about a situation. They might not have the facts, and if you feel the need to conform to, someone else's inappropriate or, I guess, erroneous judgments, that can lead you to make a misguided decision, which can be very problematic for not only yourself, but also your client or your student or whoever you're seeing. So you want to make sure that you're taking into consideration the views of others and encouraging their perspectives, but you just want to make sure that you're not conforming to every single idea that's put out there. Make sure you're having your own ideas. Some more errors are over-relying on heuristics. Heuristics are mental shortcuts or rules of thumb that we use to simplify how we process information. And it's so easy, it's not time consuming, it's something that, okay, we can do this fast, and we already know. But what can happen is, we can judge a book by its cover. Just because a person looks sad, we might think, okay, they're sad, which is, often the correlation. However, another situation, maybe if someone greeted us embracingly, we would assume, okay, they like us. But that can be erroneous, that thought process. So we want to make sure that we're not making mistakes in jumping to conclusions by over-relying on heuristics. We want to make sure we're using heuristics thoughtfully. It can help if used appropriately. It can help us find correct solutions. But what can happen is we just need to make sure that we're seeking out empirical evidence versus just basing our practices off of our conclusions or our preconceived ideas or thought processes. We need to make sure that there's scientific evidence behind it. So we want to look at that. And